Welcome to Inputs Only. This episode is going to be a little bit different than the traditional interview that you are normally accustomed to or used to here. And I've actually never recorded a solo podcast before, and I'm going to do this as a one-take wonder. So we're going to see how this turns out. But something I wanted to do it a little differently. I tend to reflect a lot in silence, and I write the newsletter as a cathartic way to express my thoughts each week. And I do it because getting things down onto the page allows me to dive deeper into my own psyche and to actually install the lessons that I've learned throughout the week and throughout my conversations and throughout the things that have popped up here and there. And it gives me a really concrete way to actually utilize a lot of the knowledge that is shared with me throughout my network, throughout the conversations that I have, throughout meeting new people, throughout the day-to-day life. And I consider myself extremely lucky for the place that I live, and I get to live in a place with a great opportunity surface area. And Los Angeles is treated me really well, and I get to meet and connect with a lot of great people. So all this to say, I wanted to publicly reflect on the first 20 episodes that I've recorded in person. And for some of you that know, I had a podcast prior to this. We did a couple 100,000 downloads, and I interviewed a lot of people, over 120 people, but it was all virtual. It felt very transactional. And I told myself that once I had an in-person studio, that I was going to find a way to relaunch a new podcast, but do it to build relationships. And that is how Inputs Only Podcast was born. Guests go through a run, recover, record protocol. So they come over for a workout. We hit the sauna and cold plunge in the backyard, and then we actually record the episode. So it's very experiential, and it has less to do with the content and more to do with the connection. And this podcast, this episode here, is the five most important things that I've learned myself, reflected myself, and written about myself from the first 20 episodes of recording in person at my new Los Angeles studio. So without further ado, number one, the power of authenticity. Now, what's interesting is the episodes that have resonated the most are the ones where the guests have shared openly and didn't try to curate the storyline. And while this is something that I feel goes without saying, that it should be noted that anytime you connect with someone, you can tell consciously or subconsciously when they're trying to curate the dialogue or curate the experience in order to get something from you. And you don't resonate and respond to those people as well, whether you know it or not. And you can feel that something's off. And the guests that I've had that had no agenda, they came strictly to connect, they came strictly to build a relationship, are actually, if we go back and look at the analytics, are the ones that are listened to the most, which I find fascinating. Even some of the guests who I personally would have thought their story or what they do is not going to resonate in a way, because I've had the opportunity to chat with some really, really cool people. Some of the people that I thought had the coolest stories had the lowest engagement. And then other ones that I personally, after the interview, was like, that was a great interview, and that was a great time spent. I don't think it was the best. They do better. So the first lesson here is that the power of authenticity wins. And when you show up with nothing to gain, but only something to give, you position yourself in a way that allows you to expand upon not only the relationship, but the energy that you're cultivating in that environment. And when you go into situations with the intention to expand, you generate. Even as I say this, I'm thinking about it in my own head, but you generate additional energy, and therefore the experience is expanded. Instead, when you go into something to take, you are consciously removing energy from the experience. And all of the guests that I've had, and even the relationships that I have in my life today, the ones that come to give. And when I myself show much deeper. So lead with authenticity. That's number one. Number two is the importance of curiosity. Now, there are some episodes that I felt have gone really well, and there are others that I felt I was searching for questions. I was listening to respond rather than understand. And what I've realized is that when I personally find genuine curiosity in the guests, in the conversations that I'm having, the conversation itself flows effortlessly. And I mean, it's kind of a lesson for life as well, but it's really be interested. We've heard this before. It's the cliche, be interested, not interesting. And it's true though, because when you show up with genuine curiosity, you ask questions to satiate your own desire. And in you satiating your own desire, you are creating space for the other person to educate you or to dive deeper into what I call an ink spot, or an I never knew that ink spot. And if the intention is to build relationships and to learn out loud, you being curious on the other person and asking what comes up, because there's no stupid questions, you asking what comes to mind and what you want to come up allows you to deepen the connection and the relationship. Again, going back to number one, you are authentically asking what comes to mind and what you're interested in. Therefore, you are allowing the episode to be exactly what it's meant to be, rather than trying to, again, curate the outcome or curate the episode in a way that you think it should be. Now, another interesting piece is I haven't wanted to record every time I've had a guest scheduled, and especially because I have this whole run, recover, record protocol that takes up the extent of like 6:30 a.m. until almost noon. And the intention for the podcast, again, is to build relationships. But when I have this curiosity, even if I don't want to record, I can get curious on who's coming into my studio, who's the guest that's going to be in front of me. And I'm actually, every single time that I haven't wanted to record, but a guest has shown up at my studio and we've gone through the motions in a way, I've become curious and I've deepened my connection with that person because of it. And by the end of it, I'm extremely glad that I did. Which brings me to point number 3, is the power of consistency. Now, intensity will get you about 80% of the way there, and I'm very good at being intense, and I haven't always been the best at consistency. But consistency is what allows you to finish. And there are some bigger name guests coming up on the show, and that's only because I have been consistent. And in my life, the things that I've been the most consistent at are the ones that have compounded and gotten me as far or farther than I had perceived myself to want to go, especially with where my life is at presently. And if I've learned anything through where I'm at now and what I'm working on now, it's that when you focus on yourself and you're consistent on the things that you find interesting and you work on building yourself every single day, what happens is you actually get to expand who you are. You get, it sounds dumb, like in a way it does, but when you focus on yourself and you expand who you are and you show up every single day and remain consistent on becoming the best version of yourself, you are building momentum towards the things that you want to create in your life. And I know if you've read the newsletter, I've gone back and forth a lot on being versus doing. And I had this breakthrough recently where I realized that being is not in opposition to doing. Doing what feels in alignment and what is right for you allows you to be more yourself. And the only reason we feel we must do something is because we don't trust in the flow of life. When if we believe that we're at the top of the stream, we just need to allow the current to take us down, life opens up and expands in front of us rather than feeling that we need to fight the current and climb up and get somewhere we haven't been because it's something we haven't done. But really what we haven't done is ride the stream all the way down to the end. So I go on this tangent of consistency because I myself have been extremely intense and am extremely intense. And it's often gotten me hurt. And it's often gotten me almost to where I want to go, but not to the finish line. And when I've shifted to as a long-term game, and we're playing Simon Sinek infinite games with infinite people, when we start to think that way, you open up the dialogue to have an expansive conversation rather than a transactional one. And that's because you're playing long-term. Now, number 4 is the value of active listening. Now, I've had an idea of where I thought conversations would go, and when I forced it, the conversation always gets choppy. And instead, when I choose to listen, to understand, and remain curious, when I felt like I needed to push, but instead got curious on what they were saying and allowed myself to engage in my own curiosity, what that did was it opened up new ways of thinking, it opened up new questions, and it allowed the conversation to expand. And most, if not all of those conversations shifted towards a very insightful piece where I can go back and say, I learned XYZ from this episode because of that moment. Now, yes, I do some research before, and there's things that I want to touch on, and I want to know where the conversation is going to be steered. But if I only go through the things that I've written down, I don't allow synchronistic moments or happy accidents, or however you want to call it, to exist in flow. And when I don't allow things to flow, I don't trust that things are going to be exactly as they must, or as they're meant to. So when I actively listen, I recognize that the words that someone says are not always, what they're saying is not always what they mean. And oftentimes when you read between the lines, you'll hear in the episodes, I say, I want to double click on that. And that's because I'm trying to expand upon something that they said where I was able to pick up on that what they were saying wasn't what they meant. And then we get to go deeper. And often that sends me down a tangential but very deep path. And most of those are the paths that have taught me something nonetheless, and taught me really to follow what feels right in those conversations and not say that it must be a certain way. So again, actively listen. This is something that I want to focus on in my own life as well. And that when I do, I'm much happier that I did, because I build genuine, authentic relationships with those people because I was authentic in listening and wanting to go deeper. Now, the 5th one is something that before I even started this, I would have told you this is probably the most important one, but it's the impact of storytelling. And I say that because honestly, I'm grateful that I get to speak and meet a lot of people, especially with the podcast. And a common theme amongst all of them is that I aspire to learn from them. So if I've invited them on the show, it's because there's something that I feel like I can learn from them, or that I'm interested in, that I want to dive deeper into, although I feel like I can learn something from everyone. But it's often because of what they've achieved in life or the career path that they've either chosen or fallen into. But all in all, the ones that I have resonated the most with are the ones who are incredible storytellers, or I say story sellers. Now, everything you want in life comes on the other side, and it's on the other side of helping someone get what they want. And in order to do that effectively, you have to sell them on the idea that what you have or what you're doing is something they should be interested in. And whether you like quote unquote sales or not, you're always selling. And the ones that are able to tell their story or explain what is important to them in a way that allows them to almost sell you on their belief are the ones that I've been most engaged in and learned from, and wanted to replicate that ability to story sell in an intentional way. And I've said this before, but I think that my degree in theater, my bachelor's in theatrical performance and with a concentration in acting, prepared me more for business than anything else, because life is relational. And if you can share stories that align with interests while building genuine relationships, you've already won the game, because it's not about transactionalness. It's about relationship building. And when you go into life and business, rather than sitting in a room with someone saying, here's what I want, here's what you want, let's get to a transaction in the middle, But instead, if you play the long game and you say, I'm going to build relationships, and when the time is right, and when it makes sense for you and me, and it's mutually beneficial for both of us, that's when we're going to do business together. It makes all the difference, because then you have built relationships and friendships and business partners and friends for life. So those are the top 5 that I learned from my first 20 episodes recording the in-person podcast. Number 1, the power of authenticity. Number 2, the importance of curiosity. Number 3, the power of consistency. Number 4, the value of active listening. And number 5, the impact of storytelling. I will see you on the next solo pod. Thank you for listening. And always remember, your inputs matter.